We did 3 preliminary tasks in the build-up to our final piece. First was the film club task, next we did the in-school preliminary task, and then we did the Wilderness Woods preliminary task.
For the brief of the film club task, this was our first experience of making a short film as a group. The brief was just a hint to a narrative structure using limited dialogue. It gave us the chance to experiment with a camera and to allow us to gain understanding of Premiere.
The next task, which we did in school, we had a brief of using continuity editing, the 180-degree rule, short conversation, opening a door, and experimenting with different camera techniques. We built a storyboard and we did a horror genre just to kind of practice in the build-up for our final piece.
The Wilderness Woods preliminary task was an experience of a location recce and to practice constructing a storyboard. It was also to give us an idea of problems we can come across when filming in outside environments.
We took inspiration from these in our camera editing, sound and mise-en-scène in the build-up to our horror piece. This establishing shot from our final piece shows a left-to-right pan, which is something we took from the establishing shot of our Wilderness Woods, which was a pan up. This camera movement looked really good with our credits coming in, so that's why we decided it would be a nice aspect to include in our final piece. The movement was produced using the handle on the tripod.
Another thing we took from Wilderness Woods was the location. We filmed in a foresty area off Hadlow Road in our final piece.
The lighting in this shot is extremely effective as it has a kind of orangey red richness to it that just looks so atmospheric in our piece, which works really well in horror.
Problems we faced while filming for our preliminary task were pedestrians getting in the way of shot.
We carefully took this into account in our final thing. Scenes filmed at the side of the road, so obviously cars were getting in the way. We kind of used this to effect, and it ended up working really well.
We realised early on that pre-filmic effects and props were our strength.
The prop that we included, that we made in the Foreshadowing, was the chloroform and the murder board.
Natural light cast shadows in Wilderness Woods, which we had already observed in many horror films.
We had to use soundtrack effectively to portray the genre of horror. So in our preliminary tasks, we made most of them horror themed so that we could practice with getting good sounds that we may use in our final piece, which we did. We used the same soundtrack.
We used non-diegetic sounds like chimes to anchor the action.
Diegetic sounds such as the swing noise we put on top. In the foreshadowing, we sped up and amplified the noise of the swing, which built the tension and made it really frightening.
We used the soundtrack to anchor the jump, which is something we introduced in our final piece, and it is something we hadn't practiced before, but we thought we executed it really well.
Camera techniques that we took from our preliminary task included low-angle shots. This emphasises the importance of the character and identifies them as the protagonist.
Candid angle was something we used in our preliminary task, and we thought it was a really edgy shot, so we used it in our final piece. This creates a dreamlike, disjointed view of the scene.
The handycam technique was something we'd used in our in-school preliminary task and our Wilderness Woods task. It worked really well, but it had a slight tackiness, so instead we used a POV shot in our foreshadowing.
We used a track and dolly shot in the Wilderness Woods task, and we executed it very poorly. We used it again in our final piece, and it looked a lot more professional.
We used a technique of continuity editing, where the character walked through the camera. It took us 3 times to realise how tacky this looked, and so for our final piece we just had the character walking out of the camera instead of through it, and it looked a lot better.
We used match cut to follow through the action. This clearly portrayed the narrative.
Parallel lines of action was something difficult for us to achieve, but we did it well in one of our preliminary tasks, so we decided that we could also execute it well in our final piece. The 2 lines of action in our final piece were the scenes out of the dream and in the dream. We used a fade transition to separate these lines of action. There is clearly an improvement from our earlier tasks to now, and it was this build-up of preliminary tasks that really helped develop our skill in filming and editing.